Hey, peace,
Peace,
peace, peace.
peace.
Good morning. Good morning. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in the Fed. I know it's unexpected, so yeah. I didn't expect to get up this morning, but I had to do this topic today because a lot of people. Well, for me, I was curious as to like what gravitate people to the concept of socialism and Marxism. So this topic is going to need to be broken down into three parts of the video because it's a whole lot to cover when it comes to Black organization and movements and and these ideologies. So the question becomes, how did Black people get involved with the concept of communism, socialism, Marxism? And we're gonna be going into a discussion about the what is Marxism, what is socialism, and also what is and the various type of Black organizations. So many Black organizations out there, so many Black leaders, Black communists, Marxists. The list goes on and on and on. So to have somebody help me to put the information together because he knows a lot about this stuff. He knows it better than I do. So I'm gonna turn the platform over to my brother Rakeem Shabazz. If you guys don't know who he has a show called The Wise Gone TV, correct?
Yes.
Is it called Wise Gone
Waka
TV?
Dome TV.
Yes, he got Wise on TV. He interviews a lot of people, a lot of great people. I mean, he done had so many people on his platform. So you guys should check it out when y'all get a chance to. But I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Brother Rakeem Shabazz. He's gonna go into the concept about socialism, the history and whatnot, and talk about various Black organizations. So
Okay,
it's on
cool,
you,
cool.
brother.
All right. Peace, peace, and thank you for that intro. And so like first I wanna before we break down some of the history, we can at least get a firm understanding on what these concepts are. And so, it's a bland definition, but one definition of Marxism and Marxist theory would be where it's a classless society, and every person within the society works for a common good, where the class struggle is theoretically gone, and the means of production is owned by the people, the workers. Through Marxism, well, in Marxist theory and the enemy was capitalism, and they saw capitalism as being exploitative to the workers, in which they called the proletariat. All right. And so the means of production are just the facilities and resources for producing goods. So in a lot of cases when it comes to business, um you know unless you make the product, right, you're still not really owning the means of production, and the people that own the means of production are the ones who are getting the richest. And therefore, you have businesses that have to pay workers low wages in order for them to make profit, and so that's what they were fighting against. And the working definition of capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. And so, within our history, I mean, we all know how we got over here, right? And we were forced to work for free for, you know, uh, almost 250 years. And through that, some people like to say, or some people theorize that you know uh slavery might have been the first form of capitalism, because there was no other there was, as far as exploitation, you can't exploit a working class of people more than you can by physically putting them in bondage and making them work for free and build your wealth up, right, while we aren't even allowed to acquire any wealth, right? And so a lot of people, some people actually feel like that's the beginning. And so I'm going to go in about some of the history of African Americans, right, that were creating socialist programs, that were studying Marxist theory, that also were involved in workers' unions, because you have to understand, whenever we're dealing with exploitation of workers, or the proletariat, as Marxist theory would call it, a lot of workers' unions were and are ways that people fight against that. It's a way for, certain workers, certain well, it's a way for people within that union to have rights within their job, right? Where, some workers unions, they'll fight for fair wages, or if you were fired unjustly, they'll go to bat for you and that kind of thing. So we're just going to build on the history of that, and so I'll start. And so a lot of this stuff, right, is uh you're not going to really be able to Google a lot of the stuff like from the early days, because you possibly can, but it's going to be hard to find. You'll have to go through different like newspaper clippings, right, and things of that nature, in order to kind of see what was going on. There are a lot of books on the subject. I have a few that I brought that actually kind of build with, some of that. But it's not. You have to understand too that it's like following breadcrumbs, right? It's not a lot of information that's going to explicitly say this is what happened, this is what was going on, right? You just have to kind of know what you're looking at. All right, so enough of me rambling. I'll get to it. And so one of the first organizations that Black people, had, that was somewhat socialist in nature in America, right? So we're dealing with America right now. In part two, maybe we can build on Black liberation movements across the world, right? But as for right now, there's enough information out there to just build on America. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. And so one of the first organizations, like socialist type organizations that we had, was the New York African Society for Mutual Relief. If you Google it, you'll find that there's a article on blackpast.org about them. They have some really dope articles, and so I have the
Yes,
article
they
here.
do.
I have the article here, and I'll read some of
Well,
it.
if you want to go ahead and share, because the share button is at
Well,
the bottom.
as well, actually, I'm on my phone, so
Okay,
instead of,
got you.
yeah, because I have a lot of notes everywhere. But
Okay,
um,
got you, got you.
I can drop some links. I can drop some links in the comment section when I'm done.
Okay, they'll be fine. They'll be great.
All right. So this article about the New York African Society for Mutual Relief. So they were around in 1808, and as you know, slavery was still on and popping. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so this just goes to show you how forward thinking our people are and have always been. There's a narrative that we were just docile, and we weren't thinking men, and we weren't thinking men and women, and we had no idea what was going on, but that's not the truth. And so I'll read this article. In 1808, the New York African Society for Mutual Relief was formally organized to assist widows, orphans, pay burial expenses for its members, and to serve as a brokerage house to buy real estate. The society was the most successful 19th century attempt by New York's African American artisans and craftsmen to buy real estate for investment purposes. Again, you see the socialist aspects of this organization, where they were there to assist widows and orphans, and also to help artisan and craftsmen buy real estate for investment purposes. The society's first president, William Hamilton, was a carpenter, and its first secretary, Henry Simpkins, was a mechanic. Hamilton was reputed to be the son of Alexander Hamilton, while Simpkins was called the Jefferson of his people for his powerful speeches supporting abolition. Other founding members included six bootmakers, two real estate dealers, and Cato Alexander, a former South Carolina slave from South Carolina, who by the 1820s opened Cato's, a posh restaurant catering to New York's wealthy and powerful families. In 1820, Juliet Toussaint wife of Pierre Toussaint, the leading hairdresser in antebellum New York, bought a tenement in the heart of Five Point section of Manhattan and an adjacent building in the rear for a meeting hall for NYASMR, located at 42 Orange Street. The purchase price was $1,800. Since monthly dues were 25 cents, the gift was substantial. Moreover, the building became a stop on the Underground Railroad, harboring fugitive slaves headed for upstate New York and Canada. So we also see that, um, when you deal with a lot of leftists or communists or socialists who are white, a lot of times they try to divorce the reality of racism, right? And it's not to say that there are definitely racist communists. There are definitely racist socialists, all right, who are European. But we see when within our movements that we cannot and we were not able to divorce ourselves from the reality of white supremacy and at this time slavery. So even though we are creating, socialist groups, um, they still acted as abolitionists on the and one of their buildings became a stop on the Underground Railroad. But I'll finish reading the article. And so by the early 1830s, the area of Five Points began to decline. The center of the neighborhood sat on a former collection pond. The springs that fed the pond were never adequately closed. By the 1830s, the NYASMR building and others in the neighborhood were literally sinking. All right, and so I don't have to read the whole article, but that just gives you a taste of what we were doing as far back as 1808. The New York African Society for Mutual Relief combined support for widows and orphans, burial insurance for members with public and covert abolitionist activities, and successful real estate investment and capital accumulation. You know, and and so that's another thing too that people often who are opponents of socialism and capitalism. I'm sorry,
Now,
socialism and communism. A lot of people who are opponents of it will say, "Well, hey, you work, or why are you accumulating money?" But you can't
well, let me
divorce your.
ask you a question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Well, let me ask you a question before you continue.
Okay.
Now, for the people out there who may be confused about socialism and communism, they a lot of time people think they're both intertwined, but there is some differences between socialism and communism. Can you explain the
Yeah,
difference?
for just in layman's terms, socialism is the bridge to communism, right? So communism is the state that socialists are trying to achieve. But due to the fact that it is a process, socialism is the process to create a communist nation. You know what I'm saying? And so
Uh-huh.
but like I was saying, you don't want to, for those that like to say, um, and I don't, regardless to what you believe or anybody believes, I haven't, stated what my ideas are. Um, but as far as what my political ideology is, but for those that are opponents of socialism and communism, a lot of times they say, hey, where you make money and you're a part of the problem. As we can see, the New York African Society of Mutual Relief invested and were about capital accumulation as well as socialist things such as insurance for its members. But the bottom line is, if you live in a capitalist society, you have to eat, you have to have shelter, you have to put clothes on your back. So you're going to have to work. You know what I'm saying? It's not. It's that you can't divorce yourself from the reality of the nation that you live in and its systems that you live in. And so, for those that want to, research that organization more, again, the name of that organization was the New York African Society for Mutual Relief. And just another big breadcrumb. This was in 1808. For those of you that like to say that, we aren't African and we are Native American and we are this and we are that, here's another example of Black people in America as far back as, I mean, go further back, but another example of Black people in America in 1808, knowing where they're from and naming their institutions after where they're from. All right, so another group is not a lot of information on them, but another group was the Humane Mechanics of Philadelphia and the Cookman's Marine Benevolent Society of 1830. Um, hold on, I think I have something on that. Actually, so if you for those who want to look those organizations up, you won't find a lot of information on Humane Mechanics of Philadelphia in 1820, but you can find there's a newspaper article about the Cookman's Marine Benevolent Society of 1830, and I believe they were workers that like they worked on shipyards and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so I think I may have an article. Actually, unfortunately, I don't. But if you want to look it up, you should be able to find something on that organization as well.
What's the
All
name of
right.
the organization?
Cookman's Marine Benevolent Society. They were prominent in 1830. All right. Another group was the American League of Colored Laborers, which was the first Black American labor union. And I'm going to show you a book where you can find a lot of this stuff at. This book right here, written by Frank Chapman. It is called Marxist Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism. So it's a really good
Okay.
book.
All right. Leave it up
All
real
right.
quick so I can jot it down.
Okay.
Say Black Liberation.
Yep. Again, it is called It's called Marxist Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism by Frank Chapman.
Okay, Frank Chapman. All
Yep,
right.
and it builds a lot on a lot of our organizations that we had that were socialist in nature, and even our experience within different communist parties in America. But it also tells you it gives you a history on a lot of important Black men and women who aren't really celebrated or known about, who history tries to forget. But so the American League of Colored Laborers, the ALCL, was the first Black American labor union. It was formed in New York City in 1850. Now, again, slavery was still a thing. We didn't. Slavery was abolished 13 years later. But even before slavery was abolished, we were still creating workers' unions. That's just another example of how forward thinking we were. And so it was formed in New York City in 1850 as a collective for skilled free craftsmen, and sought to develop agricultural and industrial art skills among its members and encourage African American business. Frederick Douglass helped organize the union in response to the difficulty Black laborers had in joining white unions. And on June 13th, 1850, the organization assembled for its inaugural meeting in the lecture room of Zion's Church on the corner of Leonard and Church Streets. There, the League appointed New York minister Samuel Ringgold Ward as its president and Henry Bibb of Michigan as its secretary. Frederick Douglass agreed to act as vice president. Nobly, all three men were activists known more for their work to abolish slavery than their efforts on behalf of working class people. But as you can see, they did not divorce the reality of slavery, abolition, and also the need for workers' unions and workers' rights, right? Like I said, a lot of white socialists, a lot of white communists just say, hey, white workers need to get together, fight the evil capitalists, and everything will be fine. But that's not the reality for Black people. The reality for Black people is, yes, we may be exploited. We may find ourselves in a situation where we're exploited by capitalism, but we are also find ourselves in a situation where we are being treated as second class citizens through white supremacy. Nonetheless, Frederick Douglass's involvement, as well as several newspaper editors and the union leadership earned the organization substantial coverage in the African American press. So this tells you that, throughout the underground circuit of black newspapers, um, the American League of Colored Laborers were getting a lot of press. So it wouldn't have been something that people weren't aware of, right? People would have definitely been aware of what was going on in the black press, underground black press in different cities was like the internet today. Like, a New York, a New York newspaper, uh, may tell what's going on in New York to somebody else who's not from New York who was able to get a hold of that paper. And so that's one of the ways that things um, uh, the information spread. And so it was important that they put that kind of stuff in those underground newspapers. But and so it says that Frederick Douglass, in that meeting that we were just building on, the union resolved to create a fund to give loans to black entrepreneurs, a planned and industrial fair for the second week of May in 1852. 70% of the proceeds would go to the exhibitors and 30% would go to the union. At the ALCL 1851 convention in New York, the members planned the creation of a bank that would provide credit, encourage saving. The ALCL was undermined by a small number of African American workers in the cities of that time, and the rise of craft unions that tend to exclude black workers from joining. So you also have black workers who were against this type of thing. You have black workers that were for this type of thing, and the reason the ALCL didn't last is because craft unions, just meaning a union that is dedicated to the craft. So if, like, let's say if I'm an electrician, have a union that is specifically designed for electrician workers. If I'm work on shipyards, having a union designed strictly for people that work on shipyards, and so those craft unions um, tended to exclude black workers from joining, but later on, some of that would change, and later on, we would begin to create our own. And another thing, as far as newspapers, Karl Marx was a frequent writer in the Herald Tribune, which was one of the newspapers that Frederick Douglass frequently read. So he was aware of who Karl Marx was and what his theory against capitalism was, right? And so this is not anything that we're reaching on or anything that we're just guessing about. Like, this is something that they would have definitely been exposed to. All right, and so according to William Z. Foster, who was a historian, the first Communist Club of America's founder was named was the founder was named Joseph Wedemeyer. And Joseph Wedemeyer expressed this. Around the time of the Civil War, he said almost all white trade unions looked at slavery as reality and pretty much none of their business. Like, we have our own issues. We're not worried about slavery, right? That's what most of the white trade unions were like at that time. German American Marxist Joseph Wedemeyer, who was the founder of the first Communist Club of America, said in his activities that he also contended for the position that the fight against slavery was central to the work of the Marxists. He strove to involve the trade unions in the great struggle. He showed without solution of the slavery question, no basic working class problem could be solved. He linked the workers' immediate demands with the fundamental issue of Negro emancipation. So here's an example of a white communist in America, who's German American, who sees slavery as a problem and links it to the socialist and Marxist and communist movements in America. Whereas before, the communist movements may have strictly just looked at all white communists and their issues that they had with their employers, with their in their trades, the issues that they had with the capitalists that got rich off their labor. Well, now you start to see some of the uh, now you start to see Marxist theory and African liberation theories come together and merge, because like I said, the reality of Africans at that time and even now, but at that time especially, was that this is not just an issue with the proletariat. This is not just an issue with the working class. This is an issue of white supremacy and slavery and, abolition. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So now the question I have, you mentioned as you was reading the article, you was mentioned somewhere that there were black people that was against the idea of communism slash socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Why were they against socialism, communism?
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I can't. I would only really be speculating, but I would just say that we're obviously not a monolith in how we think. We have just look at the differences in ideology we had with like people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey. I think it was just you're always going to have people that think opposite of what you think. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't down for the cause, right? They just may have seen um, the socialist movements as not important, right? They may have seen,
Right.
they may have looked at it like, hey, we need to worry about abolition right now. We need to be worried about our freedom. You know what I'm saying? Uh, and that's definitely, possibly one of, could be the reason why some people may have been against it. There's, I'd have to dig more to maybe find some quotes of people back then who were against it, if there are any. Like I said, a lot of that information is not easy to find.
Gotcha.
Um, but and so we know that, and like I said before, with if you want to Google him, Joseph Weydemeyer is spelled, his last name is spelled Weydemeyer, was the founder of the first Communist Club of America, and
What's his
he
last
spoke
name again? Hmm.
Weydemeyer.
Okay, and you said his name is Joseph.
Yes.
All right.
All right, and he was like I said, the founder of the first Communist Club in America. Um, and you can see, like, within his thought and within his theory, that the Black liberation struggle and the Marxist struggle against capitalism had to work hand in hand, right? Because he said, again, I'll repeat that um, the fight, the position that the fight against slavery was central to the work of the Marxists. So he strove to involve trade unions in that struggle. Now, as I just said, a lot of all white trade unions weren't trying to hear it, right? They were only concerned about their own material conditions and not the material conditions of Africans in America. And then also too, we have to remember that you know once we once we started to gain our freedom, even before emancipation, right? When everybody gained their freedom, even when some of us began to gain our freedom, we
Mm-hmm.
had skills. We were all types of smiths and farmers, and we could do a lot, and so that gave competition to white workers in those fields, which gave rise to racial antagonisms. So this is why a lot of white workers weren't, not only because they were racist and they were racist pieces of shit, but the fact that they um they were scared, right? Because they knew that we had skills. And like I said, black worker competition gave rise to more racial antagonisms. Um, even there's a newspaper article in New York Herald, January 1st, 1863, that says, which was a pro-South, I'm sorry, which was a pro-South northern newspaper, meaning there were
Pro South Northern.
there were a pro-slavery newspaper in the North. right? And so the New York Herald said used to write about the influx of slaves into the factories and shops, replacing white workers, right? So this obviously was promoting fear against the white proletariat, the white working class people, that hey, blacks are getting emancipated, they're coming into our workspaces, and I'm pretty sure they knew that we were better at their jobs than they were, and they felt the fear, which is another reason all white workers unions weren't really fooling with us like that. Um, and so you remember, like I said, the word proletariat was the word Marxist is the word Marxist theory for the working class people. So I'm going to read a little bit from this book right here, which is W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America,
Okay.
1860 to 1880, right? Um, and so
So let me
there,
ask you a question before you
sure.
get started. What's
Mm-hmm.
the difference between peasant and Polaritarian?
I think a peasant was more in feudalism, right? But a peasant would, but the proletariat, I'm pretty sure they're probably linked in the same way that the peasant worked for his noble lord, while the proletariat worked for their capitalist masters. You know what I'm saying? All right,
Right.
and so
What's the title of the
so
book again?
I'm sorry, the book W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, 1860 to 1880.
Okay.
All right, and so uh, there is a chapter. Let me see. This is chapter 10. I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 10. It is called "The Black Proletariat in South Carolina." Just another example to show you that our people were aware, or what were well aware of these theories, um, in regards to black liberation. All right, so I'm not going to read all of it. It's a pretty big chapter, but I'm just going to kind of give you a hint on what it looked like for us in places like and during Reconstruction, as far as working class people, because during Reconstruction in places like South Carolina and Georgia, there were a lot of communities that were thriving, right? Like that's where a lot of our, first black politicians had come from during Reconstruction. But so I'll read some of this chapter. A great political scientist in one of the oldest and largest American universities wrote and taught thousands of youths and readers that there is no question now that Congress did a monstrous thing and committed great political error, if not a sin, in the creation of the new electorate. It was a great wrong to civilization to put the white race of the South under the domination of the Negro race. So this is he's now you're starting to hear the fear that white people had once emancipation happened and we begin to work for ourselves, even when we worked in these different trades for other people, that they saw that as a threat to their own livelihood. You can see that now to this day, where a lot of racist Europeans will say, hey, all the Mexicans are taking the jobs, or this and that. This is the same fear that they had then, that they had now. Um, and so like I said, right now we're kind of building on black civilizations um, during Reconstruction, and this is the chapter of called "The Proletariat of South Carolina" um, by W.E.B. Du Bois in his book on Black Reconstruction. All right, and so the claim that there is nothing in the color of the skin from the point of view of political ethics is a great sophism. A black skin means a membership in a race of men which has never of itself succeeded in subjecting passion to reason, has never therefore created any civilization of its kind. So then again, they were thinking that we were uncivilized people who had come from no civilization, weren't able to create any civilization. We didn't have it in us. We were still three-fifths of human being type shit, right? But the student who would test this dictum by facts is faced by this set barrier. The whole history of Reconstruction has, with few exceptions, been written by passionate believers in the inferiority of the Negro. The whole body of facts concerning that the Negro actually said and did, how he worked, what he wanted, and for whom he voted is masked in such a cloud of charges, exaggeration, and biased testimony that most students have given up all attempt at new material of new evaluation of the old and simply repeated perfunctorily and all the current legends of black buffoons and legislators. So what he's really pretty much saying is that they've never taught during his time. They never taught the true history of what was happening during Reconstruction. As he said, South Carolina has always been pointed to as a typical Reconstruction state. It had in 1860 412,000 Negroes to 291,000 whites. So not only were we beginning to thrive in certain areas, we outnumbered Europeans in South Carolina, which was another reason for them to fear what was happening. Even at the beginning of the 19th century, the 200,000 whites were matched by 150,000 Negroes, and the influx from the border and the direct African slave trade brought a mass of black slaves to support the new Cotton Kingdom. There had always been small numbers of free Negroes, a little over 3,000 at the beginning of the century, and nearly 10,000 in 1860. So I'm just kind of skipping around in here because, like I said, it's a lot of information, but you can definitely get this book or find a PDF online. But W.E.B. Du Bois says, here's a planter worked nearly 100 hands near Cokesburg, 10 of them on the South Carolina Railroad for 6 months, and the remainder on his plantation raising a crop of corn, wheat, rice, and cotton. After the crop was harvested, the laborers were brought to Charleston, where being destitute, they had to be rationed by the government. After their arrival in the city, the planter distributed $50 among them. The largest amount anyone received was $1.25, and from that down to 50 cents. Some received nothing. So this one peck of dry corn a week was the only ration furnished from the farmhand. So we see, even after emancipation, we're doing this work, right? But we're not receiving anything for it. You know what I mean? We are working for less than working in less than humane conditions, and we're definitely not being compensated the way Europeans were being compensated for the same work. And so the Negroes were already bestirring themselves. In May 1864 at Port Royal, they held a meeting which elected delegates to the National Union Convention, which was held in Baltimore in June. In November in 1865, the colored people met at Zion Church, Charleston, and protested against the work of the convention and the legislature. The legislature refused to receive this petition and determined to ignore the matter of Negro suffrage entirely, or attended the National Union Convention in Philadelphia in 1866 and advised the legislature to reject the 14th Amendment. This is the legislature did with only one negative vote in both houses. The military commanders under Reconstruction legislation did much to abolish discrimination. One captain of a vessel was fined who refused to allow colored women to ride as first-class passengers. So we see that even during Reconstruction, we were still dealing with a lot of inherent racism, white supremacy, the fact that they thought, African workers were taking over their jobs. So this it's a pretty big chapter, but I just wanted to kind of show you W.E.B. Du Bois was aware of, the integration of Marxist theory and Black liberation ideology, which is why he has a whole chapter dedicated to the proletariat of South Carolina during
And
Reconstruction.
speaking of W.E.B. Du Bois, now, as a matter of fact, I have some information where he sent a letter to the Communist Party. So let me find that letter that he wrote.
Sure thing.
It's on here. I'm sorry?
I said, sure thing.
Okay, cool. All right, so all right.
And for those that don't know what Reconstruction is, it was the period after slavery that followed the American Civil War, and during which attempts were made to redress the inequities of slavery and its political, social, and economic legacy. So it was the program that was put in place to attempt to correct the wrongs of slavery. It only lasted about 12 years, but go ahead.
Right. All right, give me a moment. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
I can.
Okay, cool. All right, so here it is, a letter that he written back in 1961, October the 1st. All right, so it says October the 1st, 1961, to Gus Hall, Chairman, Communist Party of the USA, New York, New York. It says, on this first day of October 1961, I am applying for admission to membership in the Communist Party of the United States. I have been long and slow in coming to this conclusion, but at last my mind is settled. In college, I heard the name of Karl Marx, but read none of his work nor heard them explained. At the University of Berlin, I heard much of those thinkers who had definitively answered the theories of Marx, but again, we did not study what Marx himself had said. It says, nevertheless, I attended meetings of the Socialist Party and consider myself a socialist. On my return to America, I taught and studied for 16 years. I explained the theory of socialism and studied the organized social life of American Negroes, but still I neither read nor heard much of Marxism. Then I came to New York as an official of the new NAACP and editor of the Crisis magazine. The NAACP was a capitalist-oriented and expected support from rich philanthropists, but it had a strong socialist element in its leadership in persons like Mary Overton, William English Wallen, and Charles Edward Russell. Following their advice, I joined the Socialist Party in 1911. I knew then nothing of practical socialist politics, and in the campaign of 1912, I found myself unwilling to vote the socialist ticket, but advised Negroes to vote for Wilson. This was contrary to Socialist Party rules, and consequently, I resigned from the Socialist Party. And then he goes on to say, for the next 20 years, I tried to develop a political way of life for myself and my people. I attacked the Democrats and Republicans for monopoly and disenfranchisement of Negroes. I attacked the Socialists for trying to segregate Southern Negro members. I praised the racial attitudes of the Communists, but opposed their tactics in the case of the Scottsboro Boys and their advocacy of a Negro state. At the same time, I began to study Karl Marx and the Communists, and I read Das Capital, and other communist literature. You said what?
Das Capital.
Yeah, that's Capital. Thank you. And other communist literature. I held the Russian Revolution of 1917, but was puzzled at the contradictory news from Russia. I finally, in 1926, I began a new effort. I visited communist lands. I went to the Soviet Union in 1926, 1936, 1949, and 1959. I saw the nation develop. I visited East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. I spent 10 weeks in China, traveling all over the land. Then this summer, I rested a month in Romania. And then he goes down to say that I was early convinced that socialism was an excellent way of life, but I thought it might be reached by various methods. For Russia, I was convinced she had chosen the only way open to her at the time. I saw Scandinavia choosing a different method halfway between socialism and capitalism. In the United States, I saw consumer cooperation as a path from capitalism to socialism, while England, France, and Germany developed in the same direction in their own way. After the Depression and the Second World War, I was disillusioned. The progressive movement in the United States failed. The Cold War started. Capitalism called communism a crime. Today, I have reached a firm conclusion. Capitalism cannot reform itself. It is doomed to self-destruction. No universal selfishness can bring social good to all. Communism, the effort to give all men what they need and to ask of each the best they can contribute. This is the way, this is the only way of human life. It is difficult and hard end to reach. It has and will make mistakes, but today it marches triumphantly on in education and science, in home and food, with increased freedom of thought and deliverance from dogma. In the end, communism will triumph. I want to help to bring that day. The path of the American Communist Party is clear. It will provide the United States with a real third party and thus restore democracy to this land. I will call for one, public ownership of natural resources and of all capital; two, public control of transportation and communication; three, abolition of poverty and limitation for personal income; four, no exploitation of labor; five, social medicine with hospitalization and care for the old; six, free education for all; seven, training for jobs and jobs for all; eight, discipline for growth and reform; nine, freedom under law; 10, no dogmatic religion. These aims are not crime. These are practiced increasingly over the world. Yes, excuse me. Yeah, these are practiced increasingly over the world. No nation can call itself free, which does not allow its citizens to work for these ends. This is W.E.B. Du Bois.
Indeed, indeed. That's appreciate you for bringing that out, and that just
Mm-hmm.
goes to show that, like I said, they saw capitalism as being exploitative, and they saw that as being the enemy to Black liberation as well. And so after Reconstruction, obviously you have the rise of Jim Crow, but you also have the rise of um, you know, capitalism is on the rise at this time. From 1860 to 1900, the national wealth increased from 16 billion dollars to 88 billion dollars with the help of investment bankers like Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Vanderbilt. And capital invested went up 450% at that time. So now you're starting to see a lot of people get rich, and they start talking about the boom of America, and you see all these people getting rich, but you don't see the people that was working for them that made them rich, such as like um, the fight to like it was both black and white wage workers who fought against capitalists, um, to make the in the movement to make the workday 8 hours. It was actually a 3 month strike over 100,000 workers that won the 8 hour workday. And so this is another example of you know people fighting against the exploitation of the capitalists that they work for, or the capitalists that they come in contact with throughout America in the different phases of their life. And so like even after Reconstruction, that was the Jim Crow era. um, and Ada B. Wells, who dedicated her life to anti-lynching, she even said this, and this is she said this: alleged the alleged menace of universal suffrage have been avoided by the absolute suppression of the Negro vote. The spirit of mob murder should have been satisfied, and the butchery of Negroes should have ceased. But men, women, and children were victims of murder by individuals and murder by mobs, just because as they just murdered by mobs, just as they had been killed at the demands unwritten law to prevent Negro domination. Negroes were killed for disputing over terms and contracts with their employers. So Ida B. Wells, who was one of the leading anti-lynching, who led the leading anti-lynching campaign of her day, is telling you that, hey, some of these lynchings are happening just because black people were disputing terms with their employers, right? And so this is um, the racial aspect of the black fight against capitalism, right? So like I said, the white fight against capitalism is exploitation against the working class proletarians. The black side is twofold because we're also dealing with white supremacy, Jim Crow at this time. Also around this time, you had like opposing views in thought, such as like Booker T. Washington, who was as a former slave, was asked by the members of white business community to speak as a representative for black people. So he was probably the most popular black person of his time, or most seen and heard, because he is who white America decided to get behind. Um, his philosophy was to assure capitalists that if they invested in institutions like Tuskegee to train black people in trades like bricklaying, farming, blacksmithing, it would reform black people. He said that agitating for social equality was extremist folly. Now, as we can see, he wasn't with bucking the system, right? He don't be a agitator to the system was how he thought. But when it came to other people, such as Haywood, Harry Haywood, if y'all want to look him up, he was a leading
Oh
figure.
yeah, I got his book. I got his book. I won his book, Harry Haywood book.
For sure. And so he was a leading figure in the Communist Party in the United States. And at that time, he said this about Booker T. Washington's perspective. He said that Booker T. Washington was definitely the voice of the embryonic Negro middle class, which, though staggered by the shock of the Hayes Tilden sellout, was again striving to reform its scattered ranks to break through to a place in the sun. The fallacy in Washington's doctrine was its compromising of the Negro participation in politics and his economic rehabilitation. And so he felt that, obviously Booker T. Washington's stance on not being an agitator went against the stance of not only black liberation, right, fighting for black liberation, but it also went against the stance of fighting against white capitalists, right? Because in a lot of ways, Booker T. Washington, it sometimes may have been sponsored by some of these white capitalists. Um, and, even W.E.B. Du Bois said that didn't see the promotion of black business and being a property owner as a bad thing, but he thought it was meaningless to pursue in the absence of voting rights and social equality. And how that relates to Marxism and socialism, obviously, is that in communism, the society is classless. There are no rich or poor people if in communism in theory, right? And so Du Bois felt like, you know, I don't necessarily see black business and property owners as a bad thing because it's the material reality that we live in. We have to have food, clothing, and shelter in America, but it's meaningless if we're not going to fight. If we're not going to fight for social equality, that's social equality for black people. It's also social equality for workers' rights as well. So we go to around, World War One, and trade unions began to recruit black workers to help bolster their numbers and to fight for uh, their rights as craft workers, right? And so trade unions began to recruit black workers, such as Marine Transport Industrial Union. I'll say that again for those that may want to look up the history on that. The union was called the Marine Transport Industrial Union, and they recruited black waterfront workers. So people that worked along the Atlantic coast, whether you were white or black, they would recruit you. And the uh, Marine Transport Industrial Union, this is around World War One, like I said, in their manifesto it says, "We shall build a union that will be a real hope for all workers on the waterfront, black and white, a real support in the hour of our need, and compel the respect and recognition of all society. Generally speaking, we shall ourselves assume control of our industry and dictate the conditions. Before I finish, listen to what they said. They said, generally speaking, we shall ourselves assume control and our industry and dictate the conditions, meaning they want to dictate their conditions and own the means of production in their own industry, which is socialist in nature. And it also says a black worker and it so dictate the conditions. A black worker and industrial worker. Okay, so I'm sorry, that was it. And so there was also there was a black worker in the industrial workers of the world, um, which were called the Wobblies. You probably want to definitely look them up because they had a lot of black
What's the
people
name of
that
them again?
the industrial workers of the world, aka the Wobblies.
The industrial workers of world. Okay.
Yeah, and so uh, a black worker who was in a part of the industrial workers of the world, well, who was a wobbly. His name was Ben Fletcher, and he was actually one of the lead organizers in that campaign. And just to give you a kind of show you an idea of kind of the kind of action that they were on, um, in May of 1913, the Marine transport workers called for a strike over the opposition of the International Longshoremen Association, um, who were opposing, I guess, not only the fact that they were adding black workers, but opposing their foothold that they were getting on the industry of marine workers, right? And so the AME Church said this, which we know is the first black church in America. The AME Church expressed the attitude of the black community toward the strikers when it announced that the Wobblies or the International Workers of the World. She said they said this. At least it protects the colored man, which is more than I can say for the laws of this country. So they were beginning to establish a reputation of through fighting for the rights of their workers, whether they were black or white. They were giving certain protections to black workers that they weren't afforded anywhere else. And was from the eyes of the AME Church in Philadelphia. So this is what they said. Um, uh, like I said, they were also called Wobblies, and they were there to build class struggle and unionism and solidarity. In some cases, with Black liberation organizations or movements. Um, One of the people that was big, who was a Wobbly, who history doesn't talk about enough, was this brother here, Hubert Harrison. People want to look him up in his.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few books about Hubert Harrison that
The
build
Black
on.
Socrates.
Yes, and but this is just a small pamphlet from John G. Jackson back in the day. There's some updated books now that there's two of them actually, and it breaks down different periods of his life. I forgot what the name of them. They're both about $40 a piece, but I'll give you just an idea. Hubert Harrison. Um,
Oh, and I also got another book on that too, because I wanted to read something. But you go ahead.
Okay. And so like what John G. Jackson says, one reason Hubert Harrison is not better known is because he was a champion of unpopular causes. He was a great scholar, orator, and writer. He was a champion of labor, a foe of superstition, and avowed atheist. That's neither here nor there, his religious perspective, but he was a champion of labor. He fought for workers' rights and labor unions, right? And this is something that America has always been against. As you know, we get more into it, you'll see. And then so around this time, you have all black trade unions that begin to sprout up, and I'll give you the name of a few um, that you can look up on your own. Um, this is like I said, around the time of World War I. One is the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society. I'll say that again: the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society, and the other is another is a Colored Molders Union Society. This is just an example of black trade unions beginning to sprout up. And so
The
you have
color.
the Colored Molders, Molders Union Society. And the reason the reason they are sprouting up the way they are sprouting up, there have to be a need for them, right? Nothing. All black trade unions wouldn't sprout up if there was not a need, and the need in their eyes was that they're being exploited by their capitalist bosses, right? And so they had to find ways to protect themselves. Black organizers such as black shipyard workers who were forced out of their jobs by striking white workers, right? So now we see that, white in all white trade unions that weren't that didn't have the same sentiment as the international workers of the world, where they want to like bring in black workers as part of their organization. A lot of these all white organizations were against black workers because like again they felt that they were a threat and they were taking jobs away. But black organizers such as black shipyard workers who were forced out of their jobs by striking white workers, in response the black workers organized a cooperative, their own unions, and raised $40,000, bought their own shipyard, bought their own means of production, right, in order to employ themselves, right? So this is a way where black workers came together, bought their own means of production, and employed themselves. Didn't have to work for anybody. Even Marcus Garvey, who was a capitalist, right, was accused of being in the Communist Party and being affiliated with the Russian government by the FBI. And so a lot of times the government would throw out the word communism and communist as a scare tactic, right? Because the first thought would be, Russia, right? The first thought, Soviet Union, and that, and you had the Cold War, and you had, these issues between these two countries, and capitalism being touted as freedom, and communism being touted as oppressive. It was a way to label anything that wasn't pro-capitalism or pro-America, pro-United States democracy, capitalist. Communist. And so from this book here, I'm just going to read an excerpt. This is called right here, "Black Power and the Garvey Movement," and there's a lot
Okay.
of. It's written by Theodore Vincent. Um, and so I'll just read a quick excerpt, and this is all right, and this just goes to show how, like I said, uh, a lot of the black liberation movements and communist movements, whether the black liberation movements were communist, they were aware of what communism was. Obviously, they were aware of what Marxist theory was. Obviously, but during the Depression, the Communist Party made a concerted effort to win Garveyite support by developing a program purporting to grant black power and national independence for blacks. In their concern for the plight of the black man, the communists of the 1930s were far ahead of all other white political groups in America. Communists became active in black communities, where they sought support from laborers, day workers, the unemployed, and the young. In effect, the group which had been the foundation of the UNIA. Though they had far smaller numbers than the Garveyites, the communists proved capable organizers. During the 1930s, they arranged parades, demonstrations, and rallies which rivaled the best of the UNIA's production and size. And like the Garveyites in their heyday, the communists gave the man on the street a skepticism about the white power structure and the black bourgeoisie. Unlike the Garveyites, however, the communists found black nationalism an idea that could be dropped easily. So this is where the problem comes in, right? Some of these communists wanted black people to join them. They would fight for us, but they wanted us to divorce ourselves from the reality of being black in America, and it doesn't work like that. And Marcus Garvey never did that, even though he was a capitalist. He, I mean, we fought on all different fronts. You know what I'm saying? And he was extremely aware and understood that the racial component of why we were being treated the way we were being treated. The communist black nationalist program called for the generation of a separate black republic in the American South after the Revolution. The plan attracted no support from prominent Garveyites or ex-Garveyites. The communists claimed to have won over many of the UNIA rank and file, but only one, Lewis Campbell, who became a community organizer in Harlem, was ever elevated to a position of authority in the Communist Party. Nonetheless, the communists had a deep effect on the strength of the Garvey movement by emphasizing black nationalism. They won away young blacks who were potential recruits in the UNIA. So it looks like the Communist Party began to adopt black nationalism in order to recruit members from the UNIA and other black nationalist groups. So in the late 1930s, the communist leaders dropped their nationalist program and eased their black converts into a coalition with Franklin D. Roosevelt's Liberal New Deal. So it looks like they used nationalism as a recruiting tool for the Communist Party. And then once black people came, they dropped the nationalism and said, we're going to concentrate on the proletariat, white and black workers. But the long-range effect of the communist venture into black nationalism was to help draw a young generation of black militants into the rank of integrationists. And for the most part, communists are integrationists because they see the proletariat as all workers, right, regardless to race. The communist-style black nationalism was worked out in Moscow in 1928 by the former African Blood Brotherhood leader Harry Haywood, who we just talked about, and the Russian in Nacional. It looks like Harry Haywood actually spoke with the Communist Party in Russia because he was one of the leaders of the Communist Party in America. And it was an attempt to apply Lenin's program for national minorities in the Soviet Union to the United States, an idea which had inspired Cyril Briggs to found the ABB years earlier. At the Fourth International Communist Conference in 1928, Harry Haywood proposed that Black Americans should win a separate republic within the continental United States. A similar proposal had been discussed some years before the UNIA conventions, but was rejected as impractical. This is also something that Elijah Muhammad was teaching as well, own separate nation for Black people. But this is a communist, right? The Communist Party in America, Harry Haywood, who is advocating for a separate Black nation within America. Haywood argued that blacks, like national minorities in the Soviet Union, dominated a geographical area, had their own culture and own social institutions, and were entitled to a federal republic once the revolution had been accomplished. The Black Belt Republic, which would have been in the South, was its call to include the 60 counties in the South where blacks were the majority. A long, thin line stretching from the Brazos River country of Texas through central Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and up on through Richmond, Virginia. As with federal states in the USSR, foreign affairs and economic policy would be decided upon the United States in the conjunction with the regional states. The new republic was not to be exclusively racial, though. Blacks would be in control only because they were in the majority. The blacks living outside the republic would be expected to assimilate into the social and economic life of the larger white community that they lived in. Communists were to engage in a thorough battle against all forms of racism all over the country to prepare for the Black Belt Republic and to make assimilation to the North possible. The program did draw support while the party had a mere 24 black members. Communist Party had about 24 black members at the time. But in 1927, by the late 1930s, there was between 8,000 and 10,000 black communists, and many more became members of for a short time in the early Depression. Thus, the Communist Party included blacks in a proportion 10% comparable to their presence in a society at large. So 10% of black people at large were communists. And so that was just an example of some of the ways that, you know, people who fought for black liberation, who were also communists, integrated the two theories.
Okay, now let me show people some books they can check out by Harry Haywood, and also I wanted to go back to Herbert Harrison real fast. So here's a book that you guys can check out if you guys want to learn more about Harry Haywood. This is his autobiography right here. It's called Black Bolshevik Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, Harry Haywood. So you guys can check this out. You guys can look it up. Um, yeah, you guys can look this book up. Harry Haywood, Autobiography of Afro-American Black Bolshevik. All right. Also, you guys can also check out. As a matter of fact, I got something I want to read up from Herbert Harrison. And this book right here, it comes from this book called, hold on, man. All right, let me pull it up. All right, so this book right here is called Black Revolutionary in the United States, Communist Intervention, Volume 2, Communist Research Cluster, 2016. So I had got this from an online, from a source. This is coming from like the books that was compiled for Black History Month. So it was a brother by the name Charles Preston. He has like books that he compiles and stuff during Black History Months, and he was putting it out there for people who wanted to look more into like Black history stuff, political stuff, and all of that. So in one of these archives, I found this book here, and look up the table of content if I can. Oh, just give me a second. Hold on, give me 1 second. Yep. All right, so I'm gonna go down here where it says Herbert Harrison. It says, what socialism mean to us, 1917. It says, in the good old days when cotton was king, child slavery was a flourishing institution. Not only the people who profited by the system, but most others, even those who were the sufferers, thought that this was really a law of nature, that it couldn't be otherwise. Nevertheless, chattel slavery has gone, but while it lasted, this was its essence. Certain human beings were compelled to labor, and the wealth which their labor produced went not to them, but to the certain of the human beings who did not labor at all, but lolled in luxury on the labor of their slaves. Today, fellow sufferers, they tell us that we are free, but are we free? If you will think for a moment, you will see that we are not free at all. We have simply changed one form of slavery for another. Then it was chattel slavery. Now it is wage slavery. For that which was the essence of chattel slavery is the essence of wage slavery. It is only a difference in form. Chattel slave was compelled to work by physical force. Wage slave is compelled to work by starvation. The product of the chattel slaves' labor was taken by his master. The product of the wage slaves' labor is taken by the employer. And then it goes down to say, the United States government has made a study of the wealth producing power of the wage slaves and have shown that the average worker produced $2,451 a year. The government has also made a study of wages in the United States, which shows that the average worker gets $437 a year. This means that the average employer takes away the average wage slave $2,014 a year. In the good old days, the masters took away the wealth produced by the slaves in the simplest form. Today, he takes it away in the form of profits. But in one respect, the wage slave is worse off than a chattel slave. Under chattel slavery, the master owned the man and the land. He had to free and clothe the man. Under wage slavery, the man frees and clothes himself. Under chattel slavery, it was to the interest of the owner to give the slave work and to keep him from starving to death. Under wage slavery, if the man goes out of work, the employer doesn't care. That is no loss to him. And if the man dies, there are millions of others eager to take his place because, as I said before, they must either work for him or starve. There is one there is one very striking parallel between the two cases. Today, there are many people who say that this system is divinely appointed. It's a law of nature, just as they said the same thing of child slavery, where there are millions of workers who say that it is wrong under child slavery. Black workers were robbed under wage slavery. All the workers are robbed. The Socialist Party says that this robbing shall cease, that no worker, black or white, shall be exploited for profit. And it says further that there is one sure and certain way of putting an end to the system, that is by working for the success of socialism. All right, and I'm just gonna stop right there.
All right, cool. And there's something, and while we're on the, sorry about that, while we're on the subject of Hubert Harrison as well,
Uh huh.
I kind of want to, I'm getting close to wrapping it up, but
Okay.
but I think he's an extremely important person. Like I said, the people need to kind of do the knowledge too. So this is a note by Frank Chapman on Hubert Harrison. And so it says, we want to acknowledge an ardent supporter of the Bolshevik Revolution, which obviously was the Russian Revolution, who was also a leading light in the Harlem Renaissance. Hubert Harrison, a young black revolutionary from the tiny island of St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, resigned from the New York branch of the Socialist Party in May of 1914 and joined the International Workers of the World, aka the Wobblies, which was led by Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and William Big Bill Haywood. Harrison was a worker with encyclopedic knowledge and gifted orator who joined the the International Workers of the World, and because of their principled and anti-racist commitment to working class unity, A. Philip Randolph once described Harrison as the father of Harlem radicalism. Harrison
Harlem
also
what?
radicalism,
Okay.
right? Like yeah. And
Okay.
Harrison also played a pioneering role in the publication of many of the black radical journals during and right after World War One. For example, there was A. Philip Randolph's and Owens' publication called The Messenger. Cyril Briggs had The Crusader. Garvey had The Negro World. Um, Bridges had Challenge. Claude McKay had The Liberator. W.A. Domingo had The Emancipator. Harrison had The Voice, and it was the archway through which all others passed. Hodge Kernan, and contemporary observer and participant in the Harlem Renaissance, has written that The Voice was the first organ to express the new spirit of the Negro. The credit must go to Harrison for being the first militant apostle of the new Negro. He assisted in molding and directing the new spirit and its accompanying ideals into their most effective channels. And one might quickly add that he did so while trying to dialectically balance two apparently contradictory trends in the movement for black liberation, namely revolutionary socialism and Garvey's UNIA. Politically, Harrison differed from such black revolutionaries as Philip A. Randolph, Owen Domingo, and Grace Campbell and Briggs, in that not only he advocated for both revolutionary socialism and black nationalism, but he engaged in the Garvey movement as a member of the UNI. So he was a communist. Well, he was a socialist, but he also was in the UNIA. which is clearly a capitalist organization, because
So, wait a
he
minute,
was the
Harry
first
Haywood.
president. Huh?
Wait a minute. So Harry Haywood was a communist, but he was
No,
also in the.
this is Hubert Harrison.
I mean, Hubert Harris. But
Yeah,
you know, Hubert Harris was the mentor of Marcus Garvey.
right. And so he was one of them, right? But so
Yeah.
this was his example of being, like I said, for uh, socialism, but also being race first. Um, it is even said by Harrison's contemporaries that he was the first person in Harlem to offer Marcus Garvey a platform to speak from. Seemingly for every black radical in Harlem except Harrison, Garvey's Back to Africa movement to build a black nation was the opposite of a revolutionary socialist movement that Hubert Harrison was about. In essence, they considered it an abandonment of the struggle of black Americans for equality, for full citizenship rights here in America. Also, um, in the 1920, Harrison wrote an editorial in the Negro World entitled "Race First versus Class First." In this editorial, he pointed out that the Socialist Party turns a blind eye to the color lines being drawn by its Southern members. Case in point was that the party remained silent when a leading spokeswoman of the party was prevented from speaking to black people on socialism while they were in the same hall with white people. So as you can see, there's different. That's not to be confused with the Communist Party of America at that time, but there was a lot of people who felt like the Socialist Party of America was inherently racist. And I'll just end it with this too. We get into like the Black Panthers, and just reading the excerpt from this book. It says that Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton were inspired by the growing Black Power movement at the time and frustrated with most black activists. In Oakland, Newton and Seale started talking about forming their own organization, and they carefully studied the writings of various philosophers such as Franz Fanon, Malcolm X, Karl Marx, Mao Zedong, and Che Guevara. Also, if you look at real quick, if you look at the 10-point program, you see a lot of socialist ideology within the 10-point program. Like we want decent like the fourth is we want decent housing fit for shelter of human beings. We believe that if white landlords would not give decent housing to our black community, then housing and the land should be made into co-ops so that our community with government aid can build and make decent housing for people. We want full employment for our people. We believe that the federal government is responsible and obligated to give every man employment or a guaranteed income. We believe that white American businessmen will not give full employment, then the means of production should be taken from the businessmen and placed in the community so that the people of the community can organize and employ all of its people and give a high standard of living. And that's just part of Huey and Bobby Seale's 10-point program of the Black Panther Party. And so as far as, some of the history on black socialism and communism and Marxist theory within black liberation organizations, that's really all the notes that I have at the moment. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, I'll get with you for part 2, and then we can go from there.
Oh yeah, because there's a lot more to cover. So because we want to get into more about the Communist Party of the USA. I know you heard of Bob Vatican.
Yep.
Yeah, Bob Vatican. We're gonna talk a little bit about him. He founded what is called the Revolutionary Communist Party USA since 1975, and then we're gonna get into Cedric Robinson, Black Marxism. So I mean, and it's a long list of people. I'm telling you, it's a long list. So so you guys be prepared, take notes. He got some sources, I got some sources. So it's a lot. As you can see, he was reading a lot of information there. That's just only part of it. That's not even half of it. And it would probably take more than 3 parts to actually talk about communism, but I'm only gonna break it down to 3 parts because that way, people can get an idea, and then whatever we don't cover, people can go and look up for themselves or whatever. But yeah, it's a lot that gets into it. It's a whole lot. So to sum it up all together, basically Black people figure that if they join Communist and Socialist Party, it would help them to be able to bring about some form of collection and have some control over their own means of production and be able to control the income revenue. So it's about economic group economics. Basically, that's what they were looking for. Group
and also
economics.
empowering themselves and limiting the amount of exploitation that the rich capitalists were allowed to get away with. So you had a lot of different fronts: Black liberation, abolition, um, anti-lynching, anti-Jim Crow. But you also had the aspect of workers' rights as well, and that's where a lot of the socialist and communist and Marxist um, ideology began to seep in with ours. Like I showed, it started as early as 1808 as far as understanding the need for social programs for our people. But like I said, man, I kind of got to get out of here. But I appreciate
Okay,
you
then.
having me on, sis. Appreciate it, and I'll hit you up whenever get ready for the next one. All right.
All right, then. Cool. All right. Thank you for coming through. All
Thank you.
right.
Peace.
All right, and thank you guys for watching, for tuning in. As you can see, the brother has a lot of great information, especially when it comes to this topic. I have a lot of information, so for you guys out there, I'm just going to make sure that I got some sources, so I want you guys to check out for yourselves. I ain't gonna load you guys up. So one of the sources I just read, which was the Black revolutionaries in the United States, and then also, um, hopefully later on, this is the book that we're going to be covering on part 2. So this is the book that we're going to be talking about here. Let me go ahead and. All right, this book right here is called Black Marxism, Making a Black Radical Tradition by Cedric J. Robinson. So, Cedric J. Robinson passed away. So, but that was one of the books that he had written a long time ago. All right. So we're going to be covering on that. So it's a lot more to talk about. There's so many leaders out there that was involved in this, that was communist, socialist, so many people. So it's a lot of things we're going to get into. Be on the lookout for part 2. Like I said, it'll probably take more than 3 parts, but I'm only breaking it down for 3 parts. Okay, I'm only breaking it down. But it's a lot of information to cover, especially when you're talking about these political movements, social movements of Black people and the other movements they were in part of, like the Communist and the Socialist Party and things like that. It's a lot of things to cover. So, but anyways, with that being said, I got to get off of here, and I hope you guys have a good one. Be safe on this wonderful Friday. So, yeah, be safe on this beautiful Friday, and I will reconnect with you guys later. All right. So until then, may peace and power and elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, and also check out brother Rakeem Shabazz channel, which is Wise Dome TV. Wise Dome TV. I'm gonna put it in the chat for you guys. Okay. All right, so check out Wise Dome TV when y'all get a chance to. He does a lot of great interviews. He has a lot of people that's on there, people that's like artists, activists, historians, on the research team, even some of the Team Osiris members on there. And it's just so many others. It's a lot of people that's on there. So make sure y'all check his channel out. It's very good. Great channel. I recommend it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. All right, support the brother. But until then, like I said, I'm out. And that's it. Y'all take it easy. Please be safe during this pandemic. And I will reconnect with you guys later. All right. Peace and power and elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany. Right.